All right, fifth commandment is thou shalt not kill. Human life is sacred because from its beginning, it involves the creative action of God, and it remains forever in a special relationship with the Creator, who is its sole end. God alone is the Lord of life from its beginning until its end. Now, this is not the most controversial passage, but I'm reading this basic catechism passage about how God is the author of life and death, so don't kill, and we all recognize that. Natural law, sure. But I want to point out one word here as like a foretaste of coming attractions, that it says that God is the author of life from the beginning, and I think most people recognize that God is the author of life. You can't kill somebody because of that. We all get that, but do we get the fact that God is the creator of human life because human life is so sacred and special? I think we're losing that. I just want to point that out to you to get you thinking about that. Is the standard we have at the end of life the same standard we have at the beginning of life? More on that to come with the sixth commandment. That being said, we're going to talk about specific instances where death comes into the picture. This first slide is basically about self-defense. Ladies, block with the left, palm to the chin. I don't know what you do after that.
I look calm.
And stay, yes, very relaxed. She's clearly meditating. And they dressed accordingly, too.
Why is his tongue out?
My dad was just laughing.
To emphasize the blow to the head that he just received.
He's going to buy his tongue.
Well, that's the goal for her, at least. Yeah, clearly a stock photo. Nevertheless, there is a fundamental principle of loving oneself. It is legitimate to insist on respect for one's own right to life. Someone who defends his life is not guilty of murder, even if they deal their aggressor a lethal blow. The church is saying here that, yes, we are to love all life, but we always have to love ourselves, and that could mean the point of self-defense. You can defend yourself, and you can even kill somebody if necessary out of self-defense. So you ask, do soldiers at war commit this crime? It's possible. But, God bless you. But they have to be going to war in an act of self-defense. They cannot go to war because we want your land. That's not self-defense. And so anybody they kill, they'd be guilty of murder at that war. You got to make sure you're on the right side of war, or you're going to have a lot to answer for. Yes, ma'am.
Is Isabel doing con?
Nope.
Okay,
You killed her. You killed her. Kind of like, no, but I got her. See. All right. I actually know a soldier who was in Iraq. This is probably about 15 years ago, maybe less. And he was abused by his father growing up. And he's in Iraq and he sees a Muslim dad in public beating his son. And this American soldier took a gun and fired it right into the head of that Iraqi dad. Just because he was so enraged at the sight of child abuse that he just had to kill him. That was his. Nope. Came home, suffered from PTSD for other reasons, and found himself in prison. Yeah. Now, of course, child abuse is horrible, but now, should he have protected that child? Yes. Yeah, there's other ways to protect that child. What? Yeah, that's kind of the point here. You cannot do unnecessary violence. If a man in self-defense uses more than necessary violence, it's unlawful. Classic high school violence, guy-on-guy fist fight. If you pull out a switchblade, okay, whoa, slow down. Okay, that being said, you're going too far, perhaps. Now, if you're in a chokehold and you can't breathe to defend yourself, maybe that's an instance where you take out the switchblade. But yeah, you have to be reasonable with your response. There's a kind of a famous court case when I was your age of Jodi Arias, I believe her name was. She was being abused by her boyfriend. One day she said, "I've had enough." She didn't just kill him; she stabbed him like 50 times. Oh, and she went to jail for it, but it was a big debate, of course. Maybe it was self-defense, but it wasn't on the fourth and fifth stab, you know. And then she made her way up the list, numbers-wise. So you're just so enraged. I don't know why you're living with them, but you know. So that's what we're talking about here. Yes, you can perhaps kill somebody, but you have to know when. All right, now we're going to go into an actual list of offenses against the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. We had a presentation today about abortion. Now, abortion is a big deal. There's probably over 4,000 that happen every day in our country alone, and I think that number is small compared to Russia and China. This being said, y'all live in one of the most pro-life pockets of the world. Louisiana is probably the most pro-life state in the USA. The USA is kind of half and half when it comes to being pro-life, pro-abortion. There's a lot of gray in there. I think probably 60% of the population want abortion legal, but most of them do not want abortion legal for as long as it has been allowed legal, and I'll go into that in a second. So life begins. This first bullet point is about the moment of conception. Sperm meet egg, you have a human cell, a living cell that does need to be fed and nourished in the woman's uterus, but it is a human being. Doesn't look much like one, but nevertheless, the church dogmatically defines this as a human being, and I think most scientists would too. Scientists, of course, I've heard different things that I've been told it was universally recognized that conception is the beginning of life, but I've heard other things recently that some doctors aren't comfortable saying with that. So I can't speak for all doctors, but my biggest frustration on this topic is when people on the pro-abortion side are asked, "When does human life begin?" And they continue to say, "Oh, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know." Well, we have the science to figure it out. So who's figuring it out? Pro-abortion side, And so that's the frustration that usually people just don't want to look at it. But we have all the science and technology to know the developments from conception to fully functioning human being. All right. So the church stands by that. This teaching is unchangeable. It's that rooted in natural law and in revelation. The last thing I want you to know is when this was legalized in the United States of America. Bless you. January 22nd, 1973. Roe versus Wade is passed. Jane Roe is a teenager in Texas who did not have access to an abortion. The pro-abortion movement kind of scooped her up, found her, and said, "Hey, we're gonna fight for you for your right to have an abortion." They filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas, and it goes, of course, to the Supreme Court, who says, I think in a decision of 7-2. So Roe v. Wade decision was quite lopsided, and they said she ought to have access to an abortion. Now, this is what Roe v. Wade said for the first 6 months of pregnancy. The last 3 months of pregnancy is up to the individual state to determine if women can have an abortion months 7, 8, 9 of pregnancy. Louisiana, it's illegal. Mississippi, it's illegal. Texas, it's illegal. Those are the conservative states, and there's others, the Dakotas. In New York and Virginia, you can actually. Hey, Coach.
Isabel, did anybody see her the period before? She's not here. Huh? She has not been here. How do you know? Too.
They're good friends with her.
Okay. Thank you.
That's the problem with being a quiet student. I'm
guessing someone marked her present.
I'm guessing 3 teachers marked her
Yeah.
present.
She told us.
No, she told us she wasn't. Yeah, she's.
Well, I'm very proud of my ability to take attendance. Not that I'm perfect. I'd be surprised. You can look it up right now if you want. You think an abortion?
No, like as in like overall.
Okay, here's the point. The Roe v. Wade was a national decision. Said every state has to allow abortion for this long. Now there are states that don't even have an abortion clinic. I honestly think there might be one in Mississippi, maybe none. There might be. I think there's none in like North Dakota or something. There are states where you couldn't have an abortion because there's no abortionists. Y'all got 1 or 2 in Baton Rouge. I think 2 in New Orleans. That's it. Whether or not there's one up in Shreveport or Monroe. What? One up north. I mean that's Baptist country. They're against abortion too. So we'll see. Anyways, this is the point. That there's states have some say. What is anybody know why Roe v. Wade is in the news today? What's happening right now? I read what? It's going back to the Supreme Court. Mississippi passed a law. They voted on it as a state, I believe, and it banned abortion after 15 weeks. So we're talking a little past the 3-month mark. Mississippi says it is illegal to have an abortion after that in the state. Of course, the pro-abortion movement is going to file lawsuits. It goes to the Supreme Court, or they keep challenging it. The Supreme Court often says, oh, we'll take it, we won't take it. The Supreme Court announced last week they are taking. Actually, they might have announced Monday. I think they announced Monday. The Supreme Court is going to hear this case. And I saw a headline today. Now, I don't necessarily believe this, but I saw an editorial headline on NBC News today that said it's the end of Roe versus Wade. They think that the Supreme Court is conservative enough to overturn Roe v. Wade. That could happen this summer. I am less optimistic. I honestly don't think that the Supreme Court is going to overrule. I'd welcome it, of course, for the lives that have been lost and for the lives that can be saved. But you're going to see Roe versus Wade in the news, and I want you to be able to say, January 22nd, 1973, legalized abortion for 6 months, and you'll be able to talk this because you're a well-educated Catholic school student. Question, Melaine.
Wait, so Roe versus Wade states on the person having 6 months to have an abortion, or the state decides after 6 months?
The state decides to legalize it or not. Not decide if you have an abortion or not. If you have an option. Which in Louisiana. Now, why would you have an abortion? It is very rare. In fact, I think that was well done in your presentation. You showed out. Most abortions are in the first, 3 months? Nevertheless, some people, I actually, this was a sad instance post 9/11. I know y'all weren't even born yet, but after 9/11, a lot of wives lost their husbands. I believe it was Planned Parenthood, if not other abortion groups, offered free abortion to anyone who lost their spouse, any woman who lost their husband in 9/11. They could have an abortion. Why? Because they don't want to raise the kid alone. And so I know. Right. It's like how don't you want this baby to remember to carry on? But no, there was free abortions in New York City. That was the pro-abortion movement's response to 9/11. So that's why people would have an abortion later, change of life, change of scenario, maybe rough marriage, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, that's all I have to teach on it. Like I said, If it was more controversial, and listen, I actually had a group 2 years ago come up and give their moral presentation on abortion, and they were pro-choice, pro-abortion. And they explained, and there's mutual respect. They didn't answer my questions very well, but that was that. So, like, I know that some of you do not have the stereotypical Catholic conservative view on this issue. Nevertheless, y'all see it for what it is. So I don't feel the need to educate you any more than this. It's obviously an offense against the fifth commandment. All right. Next issue, if we're good. Death penalty. Now we're going to start by talking about what does the Catholic Church say about how do you punish a person in general. The Church says that punishment has the primary aim of redressing the disorder introduced by the offense. So when you punish somebody, you're supposed to help them fix the problem. We don't think of punishment like that often. What do you think about it as? Yeah, you just want to get back at somebody. You want vengeance. You want them to suffer like they made other people suffer. You want to humiliate them. You know, somebody does something bad enough. You want them expelled and to feel that pain. And we don't often see that. We don't see punishment as supposed to fix the person. But, you know, that is what the Church teaches. Like this word's a good way to describe it. A medicinal purpose. So whatever punishment you give, it has to help the person. That's hard to do. You have to see their dignity. You have to believe that they are good at their core to even take this approach. You know, when I fuss at my kids for, not using a toy right or fighting over a toy, I'm going to take the toy away. Nobody gets to play with it, right? And they're not going to fight, at least my kids, they're not going to fight over it again. And when they get it back 2 days later, then we'll see how they do. But they learn that if you don't share, you don't play, period. So it goes from there and all the corporal punishment y'all got as kids all the way up to the death penalty. Is it moral to punish a crime? All right, so a little background on how recently developed this issue was. This is the original print of the Catholic Catechism of the Catholic Church by Paulus Press. I'm trying to figure out what year. Looks like 1994. This was published. What I was told was that this first version of the Catechism was a bit unclear on the issue of contraception. So what they did, they made a few edits and they published what is much more commonly seen as this green version with a different publisher, I believe. And this is the second edition. I'm just interested for my own knowledge when this second edition was published.
1986.
It would have to be after 1994, but thank you. 1997. So 3 years later, they published this. As far as I know, there have been no edits since 1997 until 2018, when Pope Francis changed the church's teaching slightly. I wouldn't even say he changed it. He reworded it in 2018 on the death penalty. So this has been a recent development. And this catechism book, which I'm holding in my left hand, is out of date because of Pope Francis. I don't know. They haven't printed one yet with the new paragraphs. I don't know when they will or if they will. Yeah, I think he only changed 2 paragraphs. All right. So this first paragraph from the Catechism says that recourse to the death penalty on the part of legitimate authority following a fair trial was long considered an appropriate response to the gravity of certain crimes and an acceptable yet extreme means of safeguarding the common good. The death penalty was allowed and even saluted by many Catholic saints, many Catholic popes for centuries. Today, however, the church says that we've developed our doctrine, we've developed our understanding. I think the world has as well, and we've learned from our mistakes. And there's an increasing awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost even after the commission, the doing of very serious crimes. You maintain your human dignity after you bomb a whole venue. I'm just thinking of there's nothing you can do to lose your dignity because you always remain in the image and likeness of God. In addition, a new understanding has emerged of the significance of penal sanctions imposed by the state. Lastly, more effective systems of detention have been developed. We have stronger prisons. We have higher technology, whereby we can safely assume that people will not escape jail, prison. We can always keep tabs on them, and therefore they are not a threat to the future of society. Well, that's the point. People don't escape from prison quite like they used to. And so if we can put them in jail and be confident that they're staying there, we shouldn't kill them because they have time in jail to find themselves, to find God, find redemption, find hope, fix the problem, etc.
But that's just like tax dollars, right?
Those tax dollars either way, whether you execute them or you imprison them. Nobody in here did the death penalty, did they? Okay. You didn't see those numbers for how much it costs to.
I think I might have been, I don't know if I had it in my finger, but it actually costs more than the death penalty, even though the execution itself doesn't cost that much to find evidence and take it through all of the courts.
Yeah.
It takes forever to get
A lot of court time.
a lot of court time, so that actually costs more.
Right. Thank you, Danielle. That being said, the key word that Pope Francis changed, the Catechism previously had said that the times and places for the death penalty today are rare, if not non-existent. Basically, the Catechism had said that death penalty basically does not exist today because of our higher technology. Pope Francis erased that. He says, let's just take it a step further and say that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person, and she works with determination for its abolition worldwide. So the Catholic Church has taken a stance against the death penalty really in the past 50 years, frankly. And John Paul II did a lot. Pope Benedict XVI spoke out against the death penalty, and Pope Francis says he had the ball on the 1 yard line, and he was the quarterback, and he just did the QB sneak, jump over the pile. And he says, death penalty is inadmissible, and I expect church teaching to just stop there on it. I mean, there's not much more to say. Pope Francis really made it clear where the church stands today. So, where does period 4 stand? I don't think I looked at that response.
I'll put it rare.
Wow. Last class, it was 20% B. 70% C.
I think that dude.
Y'all are
in
quite
Vegas
split.
when this dude shot up the concert. Yeah, I think if you would have survived, I think that's inexcusable. That's insane. What?
A lot of serial
That's what I'm saying. So, depending on how bad.
Okay, so that was bad.
That's very scary.
Fired up.
Staying in prison.
Sure.
They should be.
Put to death.
Staying in prison is the worst thing. A lot of serial killers want to die.
Yeah.
Hence why most of them commit suicide probably before they can get caught. So yeah, y'all are entitled to your own opinion, of course. I'm here to just teach the Catholic Church's teaching. All right. Y'all cite a presentation on suicide. There's one addendum I want to add to the suicide presentation. I don't need to teach you that suicide is wrong. It's an offense against God. Of course, all these things, right? We also know that, you know, you hopefully know enough to know that if I ask you, well, does somebody go to heaven after suicide? You might say, well, mental illness. Mental illness would inhibit, and the Catechism does say that. It says psychological disturbances, and elaborates a little bit with other examples. Anguish, great fear of hardship, suffering, can diminish the responsibility. Somebody is not as guilty of suicide when these factors are in play, namely mental illness. And so because of that, God takes that into account when this person meets their judgment. Okay, hopefully you knew that already. Anybody know what percentage of suicides are believed to be a result of mental illness?
70.
Do you remember?
30.
Or no?
5.
Almost all.
85.
90 is the number. That's the question. I know one story of George Eastman. See, George Eastman invented, I think, largely the camera and film, and started the business Kodak in Rochester, New York, where I'm from, where my dad has been. You good? And George Eastman was a very successful businessman and inventor. Late in his life, he said, I'm done. I did what I wanted to. And there was no trace of mental illness or, you know, he just took his own life.
Like, how did you do it?
I don't know. Back in his day, it would be probably being hung, or he would hang himself, or gunshot. As I stretch my neck. So, what do you think? I do think that exists. Some people in other classes today have debated me, like, no, everybody that commits suicide has mental illness. I don't think so. I really don't. I think some people are just like, you know what, I'm done. I actually saw a video. A student did euthanasia a couple years ago. I'm talking. A student does euthanasia, and they actually show how it's being legalized in some countries. There was some prime minister from a foreign country who decided, because they had cancer, they were going to kill themselves, voluntary suicide, and it was filmed and put on TV, and you could find the clip on YouTube. No, he took either pills or an injection, put him to sleep forever. So I'll watch that video, and it wasn't like dramatic or I have to do this. It was just like, I'm gonna end my life. I don't think it's always mental illness. I think it's usually mental illness. But what might you say about the 10% and their hope to go to heaven? No hope. The church always holds out hope, and the term I want you to be aware of is salutary repentance. We should not despair of the eternal salvation of persons who have taken their own lives by ways known to God alone. God can provide opportunity for salutary repentance. Basically, a random, unforeseen coming of repentance of, oh God, I am sorry. And I've heard one story of this where an Italian mother goes to Padre Pio, who was a very holy mystical saint in the 50s in Italy. She goes to Pio and she says, my son committed suicide. Like, give me something to hope for. What could possibly, console me for the rest of my life? And Padre Pio had a vision of her son jumping off a bridge. And after he jumped, he had this moment of, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That was the wrong decision. And Pio saw God answer that cry, that prayer, and entered into his heart. And Pio told this mom, your son was saved between the bridge and the water. Pretty remarkable. So that's what we mean. Even with somebody that might be fully aware and not suffering mental illness, you never know what sort of last minute prayer. You never know. I mean, you remember that lesson I gave y'all about soul existing after death, near death experiences? Nod to flatter me, please. Thank you. And in that, you saw how souls were very aware that I am dying. I am leaving this earth. I am going to meet God. And your soul is still there. You're fully conscious. What prayers you could throw up at that moment could work to get you in the happy place for all eternity. All right, so I wanted to teach y'all about that because suicide, of course, is an ongoing topic. It's a growing threat. Number 10 cause of death in the United States of America. Hence, it's state law. I don't know if I told y'all this, for you to have that suicide prevention number on the back of your IDs because suicide is increasing in Louisiana. So just to have you have this awareness to always hold out hope whenever you hear of any level of suicide or attempted suicide, that you pray for that soul. Okay? What do we got? All right, last offense. See if I can do it in 10 minutes. Euthanasia. Hard to spell, so 3 A's in there. A lot of people like to throw in an E. Euthanasia. Those whose lives are diminished or weakened deserve special respect. Sick or handicapped persons should be helped to lead lives as normal as possible. We owe it to the sick to take care of them. When people deliberately end their lives because they are sick, because they are old, because they are handicapped, we call that euthanasia. It's the deliberate killing of somebody who is perhaps disadvantaged or unhealthy. So that's euthanasia by definition. You want to know that. Catechism goes on to say that this is wrong for 2 reasons. It's contrary to their dignity, and it's contrary to the respect due to God, who is author of life and death. Okay, so all that seems very like bullet point, right? Catechism paragraph. Yeah, sure, don't kill a sick person, but I'm telling you, if you don't have experience with this issue, it gets really gray, it gets really messy, and it can get rough. When I was your age, there was a big instance of euthanasia in the news. There was a woman by the name of Terry Schiavo who had like cardiac arrest. It withheld oxygen from her brain for a certain amount of time, and so she was mentally handicapped for the rest of her life. And she was only like 20-something when that happened. She spends the rest of her life in a wheelchair, not able to respond really. And her husband wanted permission to remove her feeding tube so she would die. And her family said, no, we want to take care of her. We want, to take care of her. And this was a big debate. Went to all the courts of America. This is coming out of Florida. Congress had an emergency session to pass a bill that would save her life. President Bush signed it, but it didn't work because a federal judge blocked it. All this being said, it gets really hard when the husband won. Her feeding tube was removed, and she died 13 days later. She lived for 13 days without food or water. Yeah, and this woman, of course, was limited to a hospital bed, so she's not exerting a lot of energy. She doesn't need a lot of calories compared to the average human being, but I couldn't believe 13 days. And it was a slow death, and her family visited, and I met her family years after this because they came speak at the college I was working at or studying at, and I hosted them as speakers on campus, and they told me something that forever changed my perception of euthanasia. They said that when the courts passed a law that Terry is not to receive any food or water, they were allowed to visit her. And they were allowed to water the plants in her hospital room. But if they put any water on her lips, they would have gone to prison. And that's when it really hit me. I was like, you were able to water a plant, but you were not able to give water to your child or your sister. And I was like, that's just inhumane. You know? And so that was a big debate. It hasn't come up in the news too much. I'm going to, these are videos that I'm going to skip for time's sake. But I do want you to know what the church says and what guidance she gives morally on how to handle these instances. Because the church is not as hard-lined as you might suspect on this issue. She says you can discontinue medical procedures that are burdensome, dangerous, extraordinary, or disproportionate to the outcome. That's legitimate. In other words, you don't always have to do chemotherapy. If the cancer is really getting to a person and they're getting real frail and chemo is taxing, it's okay to wave the white flag and not do chemo. My grandmother had about 3 strokes in about 2 months. And she only had 30% of her brain working. Doc says that the only way to treat her at this point is brain surgery, and brain surgery's got about a 10% chance of working. We don't have to have that brain surgery. And we didn't have that brain surgery, you know. So you don't have to do everything, especially with all the medical technology we have today. You can keep a lot of people alive for a long time, and you're really just extending the misery unnecessarily. Church says let them go. You can let them go. But what happened to Terry Schiavo, and what happens a lot of times, is not just not doing chemo, not doing brain surgery. It's taking away food and water and starving the person to death. And the church says that's not dignified. That's not respectful. It's not. How can you say to Jesus, we took care of you when you were sick, when we do that? And so I read the next paragraph. Even if death is thought imminent, ordinary care is owed to a sick person and cannot be legitimately interrupted. And by ordinary, I write in this is not the catechism words, but in America, I believe ordinary implies food, air, water. Air meaning, apart from a respiratory pandemic, a ventilator is not that hard to come by. You offer a ventilator if it's going to save somebody. It's not high technology in America. It's kind of just routine. I think you got to put somebody on air. Water and food. Like, you have to give that to a person. If the cancer is going to get to them and kill them, then that's something else. But what often happens is we starve our loved ones to death because we don't want them to suffer from cancer. Well, the church says it's not very dignified. It's not very respectful to God, who might have a plan, maybe to cure the person, maybe to use the person suffering for a future redemption. Any questions on euthanasia? All right. It's messy. I'm going to show you a video next class about it. That's all we have for today.